So alhamdulillah, I think I actually learned a lot of Quran memorization tips that aren't really talked about that much. And I think that'll be a benefit to someone who's just starting, or maybe if you haven't heard them before, it could still benefit you even if you're someone experienced. And one of the main lessons that I had to learn the hard way is that the first time you memorize something is actually the most important. You see, when I was first starting off on this journey and I was memorizing Juz Amma, I actually memorized a lot of the surahs in that Juz specifically only by listening, not even reading. And what essentially happened was I memorized things incorrectly because I didn't actually read. I was only just memorizing by listening. And if I listened to a word particularly wrong, or there was a harakats, it was a kesra instead of a fatha or something, and I didn't recognize it, then later on when I started reviewing, I was like, wait, I memorized this entirely wrong. And after that, when you try to correct something that you memorized the first time incorrectly, it's like double or maybe even triple the effort, and it's extremely hard to fix. So in my opinion, if you're trying to get your tajweed right, or if you're just even trying to fix like when to stop when you're reciting, when to stop in a verse, one of the best ways to do that is just to make sure when you're memorizing that first time, you're doing it perfectly. Because every single time after the first time will literally just get 10 times harder. And now this next tip might seem like a little bit of a contradiction of what I just said, but hear me out. So after you've kind of prepared what you're going to memorize and you know it's going to be with correct tajweed and you know where to stop, I actually recommend memorizing that first few pages, or maybe even first page if you're a beginner, extremely fast. And the reason being is because if you're going through, let's say, multiple pages, let's say you're on something with like 10 pages, like Surah Al-Ahzab or something like that, you can just memorize the first page with like a little bit of memory, because when you start reviewing the entire surah later on, you're going to be going through that first page the most out of any other page. So since that first page will probably be reviewed the most out of all the pages you memorize, you can actually kind of go through it pretty quick in the beginning, because you know later on, you're just going to keep reviewing it. And just by doing this, you actually might speed up your memorization by quite a lot. But just make sure, like I said, you're doing it after you know that you have correct tajweed and you're stopping in the correct spots. And now this next tip is also pretty important as well, and it might actually help you in terms of preventing forgetting the Quran. You see, when I review Quran, and I've heard this from other people as well, usually you forget at the top of a page or at the bottom of the page, like when you're switching pages. Because essentially, if you think about it, when you're memorizing something, your mind is kind of taking a snapshot of that whole page. So you kind of, it's much easier to memorize from top to bottom. But when you flip the page, it's a whole new top to bottom sequence that your mind isn't really used to. And inshallah, the solution to this is to memorize between pages and to revise that area way stronger than you might just be memorizing like a normal page. Because that between pages, like right when you flip pages, is usually where most people are forgetting. And this brings me to my last point, which is that there's actually levels of memory. And I didn't really know this starting out. I thought once you have something memorized, that's it. Like you have it memorized or you don't, it's one or the other. Where in reality, it's not like that at all. And you start to realize that the more you embark on this hifz journey. See, honestly, most people can memorize an ayah within just like a few minutes. But the real test is how many minutes can go by to where you still know what you just memorized. And essentially, the more you revise, the longer you can go without having memorize that specific ayah, yet still have it in your memory, if that makes sense. However, when I was starting, I would just think, okay, I got to level 1 where I can repeat a page without looking at it. Boom, let's move on to the next one. Where it's not like that at all. You want to make sure that when you're revising, like you're just like pounding it in your memory. So you know for a fact, even if a week goes by, 2 weeks goes by, you're still going to have it in your head. Or even if you maybe forget it, you can pull it back just like this. And unfortunately, that means you have to revise way more Quran than you think. And this is something I think a lot of beginners do and that I did, whereas you underestimate the amount of Quran you have to revise. So most of your day, you might just be trying to memorize something new. And then what happens then is that when you start seeing that you're forgetting what you memorize, your whole morale around hifz, or around memorizing Quran, just starts to dip. It's way more impressive to actually see how much you've retained of the Quran than how much you actually memorize. And this is something that I personally struggle with, and that I think a lot of people struggle with, because you might just trying to be seeming like, oh, you know, I memorized this much of the Quran, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, that's just like, it might just be very weak memory or barely any memory at all, where the real kind of power, the real credit should go to someone who actually retains the Quran, because that's way harder to do, but also way more beneficial. And inshallah, if you want help revision, by the way, feel free to join our Quran community inside, where we revise every single weekend. And you'll find people of every experience level, from people who've finished the Quran to people who are just starting out. Anyway, I hope that was a benefit. And Assalamu alaikum.